A woman who seemingly referred to herself online as cornbread fed, well, she's not going to be eating well for a long time. No, she's been sentenced to 40 years in prison after admitting she killed a man on their first date. Well, now, nearly 2 years after the crime, we speak with the victim's mother and the prosecutor in this case about whether they think justice was served. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Webb. In September 2022, out in Mississippi, Carson Sistrunk's family reported him missing. 24-year-old apparently planned to meet up with a girl that he met online on this app Snapchat, but he didn't come back. A few days later, after he was reported missing, Carson's body was found at an oil well site. One of the workers had spotted the tire tracks, which led him to Carson's body. The coroner confirmed he had been shot to death. But the police identified their lead suspect, then 20-year-old Sierra Inscoe, when they stopped her for driving Sistrunk's truck days after the killing. Lawrence County Sheriff Ryan Everett told the Daily Beast that his agency was called to assist and observed a, quote, pretty good amount of blood in the truck bed. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigation got involved. Their agents arrested Inscoe on a motor vehicle theft warrant. Then they added the murder charge. Inscoe had recently moved to Jefferson Davis County from Nashville, Tennessee, and she and Carson had been chatting online, decided to meet up. Now, the motive for Inscoe's crime has never been clear, although I will tell you, the Daily Beast did an in-depth article on Inscoe, speaking with people who knew her, and they said not only does she have a history of trying to scam men out of money, but she'd also stolen a man's truck before. So 3 months before Inscoe killed Carson, another Mississippi man filed a report in Lawrence County saying she's taken off with his car. Aaron Smith told the Daily Beast that he'd met Inscoe on Facebook, again, using social media as a way to allegedly find victims. And he says he offered her to stay in this extra room he had while she sorted out her housing situation because apparently she had issues with her landlord. So he says everything was normal, everything was fine, until one night she woke up screaming that her mother had been in a car accident and she needed to get to the hospital right away. So Aaron said, okay, take my truck. After all, she'd used it before to get errands and things like that. Except this time, she apparently never came back, and she blocked Aaron on Facebook, leaving the father of three with no car. So Aaron and his sister, they start reaching out to Inscoe's relatives. They don't know where she is. They couldn't get a hold of her. Although Aaron and his sister come to find out that apparently Inscoe was still accepting followers on TikTok and receiving money on Venmo. So what happens? Aaron and his dad, who owned the car, filed a stolen vehicle report. And not long after, they found it, but the driver inside said Inscoe had sold the truck to him, and they still couldn't find her. And get this, back in 2020, an acquaintance said that Inscoe was living in Gainesville, Florida, and said she was a trauma nurse. That's what she was claiming. She was a trauma nurse, but when Inscoe started dating someone, it turns out he had two friends, one of which was a private investigator. They start looking into this, and according to the Daily Beast, the friends say Inscoe claimed to be an ER nurse, but she was off visiting her boyfriend in another state for long periods of time, and she said she had a bachelor's degree in nursing from a school that seemingly doesn't have a nursing program. They also couldn't find her license as a registered nurse in any other state that they looked. So then Inscoe suddenly announced, of all things, she had ovarian cancer. She apparently moves from Florida to Tennessee to get cancer treatments. She lived with a friend who waited on her hand and foot, but it turns out, guess what? She didn't have cancer. She wasn't sick. And to top things off, her boyfriend had reportedly given her thousands of dollars over the past year to buy Christmas presents for his family, but she hadn't bought anything. The boyfriend broke up with her, says he never spoke to her again, and since then Inscoe has listed herself as a ranch hand on LinkedIn and announced on social media that she was starting an OnlyFans page. But now she is going to prison after pleading guilty to Carson's murder. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison, but she has to do at least 35 years before she's even eligible for parole. So if that's the case, she was released by then, she would be in her 50s by then. Hey, everybody, I want to take a quick sidebar from Sidebar to tell you guys about Wondery's awesome podcast, American Scandal. You can listen right now and explore the biggest political corruption scheme in U.S. history. Using vivid and immersive storytelling, American Scandal retraces the bribes, players, and underhanded deals related to the Teapot Dome scandal. In 1922, newspapers reported that Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall had leased federally owned oil reserves to two of the nation's wealthiest oil barons, Edward Doheny and Harry Sinclair. Fall had made the deals to enrich himself, and all three men were charged with defrauding the U.S. government. The scandal, named after one of the oil reserves in Wyoming, would eventually send Sinclair to prison for contempt of Congress and jury tampering, and made Fall the first person ever convicted of a crime committed while serving in the U.S. cabinet. Follow American Scandal on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge this season, American Scandal Teapot Dome, early and ad-free right now at wondery.fm/LC Sidebar. I'm joined right now by Carson's mom, Darlene Sistrunk, as well as Assistant District Attorney Chip Lewis, who prosecuted this case. Thank you both so much for coming on here. Darlene, I want to start with you. I told you this before we started. I want to mention this again. I'm so sorry for your loss. I know this hasn't been easy the last 2 years, but what has it been for like the last few weeks as these developments have been happening? How's it been?
Well, we're just glad that it's over with as far as the case goes. We can get back to living a little bit, but surely it'll never, our son will never be replaced. The pain and the hurt, but um, I guess this year has been more of a reality that has set in that he won't be back. The first year was, just different paperwork things getting over the first year, but this year has certainly been, I guess, the harder to realize that he's not coming back.
And what
So the reality that we won't have him here, you know.
and that's what's the ultimate tragedy of this, because we went through everything about her life and what she was doing and how she ended up doing this and the people that she's conned in the past. But I want to focus more on Carson for a minute. What was he like? What did he like to do? What was his dreams like? What was Carson doing at that point in his life? We just don't have a good sense of who he was. You know, we talk so much about the case, but I'd like to know a little bit more about him.
Right, right, and I appreciate that we are focusing on him today. Carson was 24 years old. He had just started living really his life. He was a welder at Deployed Resources in Jackson area. Loved his job. Um, he also his passion was guns, and he was a gunsmith. He had started training to become a gunsmith at the range in Gluckstadt, Mississippi, and he loved that. He went by several names. Of course, to his older brother was Clint. He was brother to him. He was our baby. He was a friend, and at the range, he was called Padawan. So
Hmm.
Carson and Little Man was another name. So we had his tag, um, Little Man. So, but if you saw him get out of his truck, he was big in stature and just a big man. So,
Yeah.
um, but you know, fun loving, kind, loved to fish, loved to hunt. Um, he was just a big guy that loved, loved. And one of his friends had even wrote a song about him.
Darlene, before I go
Okay.
to Chip with some of the legal aspects of this case, if you can, and I know this might be difficult, how did you find out what happened to your son? Did you know that he was talking to this woman online? When you found out what happened, what was your reaction?
I knew he had been on Snapchat, and this was the where he had met her. He had met several other girls that he had talked with, um, and I knew about. And this particular girl, one day he said he was going to go out and had met a girl from McGee or Mendenhall. And I said, well, let me see a picture of her. And he showed me the picture. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, just be careful. And my understanding, he had met her several times. So he did not just meet her one time, it was several times. And I think during that time, he just wanted to be a friend to her.
And that's the question I wanted to ask both of you, and Chip, if you want to jump in on this too. As far as I understand, the motive for why she targeted Carson and why she did this, it doesn't seem entirely clear. Do we have a theory of why she did this?
My understanding is that she said by the time her birthday was, when she was 21, she would have another truck. And so that was my understanding, but Chip can verify that or talk about that. So.
Yeah, so she never really gave any statements from her own perspective as to what her motive was. There were several witnesses that gave statements to the effect that she had said that she was going to acquire a new vehicle by her 21st birthday. She turned 21, I believe, 2 days after she was arrested. So this was all very close in time to her 21st birthday. And moreover, there was evidence that this was not the first person that she had robbed or set up at one of these rural oil well sites in Jefferson Davis County. I do think that this was a robbery, was the motive.
And it went bad. I mean, that's why she took his life.
We don't know what happened in those last few seconds. What we do know is that I believe it was her intention to take that vehicle, and in the process of doing so, unfortunately, Mr. Sistrunk was shot and killed.
Mr. Lewis, I want to ask you a question about this. So my understanding is she was arrested in September of 2022. She sat behind bars until a grand jury indictment in August of 2023, then didn't enter a plea until July 2024, if I have those dates correct. But what was happening during those gaps of time?
So initially, she was originally charged, obviously, with the murder, but in the interim time period between arrest and the grand jury indictment being returned, there was a great deal of forensic evidence that had to be analyzed by both our state lab and a private lab in Jackson. There was DNA analysis that was done on a lot of blood evidence that was taken. A lot of that stuff takes time, as well as we had to wait for a medical examiner's report to come back. It was very preliminarily ruled that his cause of death was by gunshot wounds, but nonetheless, we still have to wait for that official report to come from the medical examiner's office. So, before we take a case to grand jury, we're going to have all our ducks in a row so that we can hopefully get it on a trial track fast. So we needed to wait for all of that information to become available.
Do you know why she pled guilty?
I will say, the case was a strong case against her. There was a lot of evidence that would, justify that she did this crime. And so as to what changed her mind or what those conversations were like between her and her attorney, I don't know. But,
Sure.
you know.
Well, let me ask you this, and this is to both you and Darlene, but Darlene, I'll start with you on this. Sentenced to 40 years. There's the possibility she could get out in 35. She killed your son. Do you find that to be justice in this case?
Well, nothing's going to bring him back. Feel that justice was served. She will serve most of her life, behind bars. And we will be older. My son will be, 71. I don't know what else to say, but it's a lot of times we don't have words to say. But I feel like at this point, yes.
And Mr. Lewis, what are the chances that she gets out after 35 years? What would be the protocol? What would be the rationale? What would be the factors that are considered? And also, let's get your take on the fact that this was the sentence in this case.
The fact of the matter is that she should get out in 35 under our laws currently. Those remaining 5 years would be under the supervision of MDO on what we call post-release supervision. so that she could be monitored. The sentence in this case it was reached by agreement between the state and the defense. In this case, one of the biggest factors was discussions that I had with the family, because you always have to consider the pain that's going to be endured and going through a 2-week trial, and then the uncertainty of the outcomes, no matter how strong your case is. Even on appeal, I've seen cases that got overturned because of something that neither party had any control over. In every case, I have these discussions with families of victims, and I want their input.
So Darlene, I want to finish this up by focusing on Carson. And you mentioned that you want to read something to us. You think it's important for everybody to know a little bit more about Carson. The floor is yours.
His little man. Little man, there's nothing little about the way you loved. With sincerity, purity, and open arms, your family and us. Little man, there's nothing little about the way you trusted. With your entire heart, freely, without reservation. Little man, there's nothing little about the way you gave. Completely, utterly, and selfishly. You taught us so much. Little man, there's nothing little about the way you helped. With your strong, ready, steady presence at any time. Little man, there's nothing little about the way you ventured. Finding new adventures, embracing the goofy, wild, and fun. Little man, there's nothing little about the way you smiled. It grew straight up from your heart and touched ours. Little man, there's nothing little about the way you laughed. With tears rolling down, bouncing, and breathless hee-hees. Little man, there's nothing little about the way you touched. Every soul you met worth your notice, time, and attention. Little man, there's nothing little about the way you lived. And invited, gifted, and garnered others to join you. Little man, there's nothing little about the hole in our hearts that you left behind. But, little man, there's nothing about our resolve to take the best of you into our hearts to face a future we seek to understand. And that was from Jennifer Osborne, his high school teacher, that wrote that. And thank you for letting me share it with you.
No, Darlene, that was beautiful. That was beautiful. And I think we all got a sense of just not only how special Carson was, but the impact he had on so many people's lives, not just his family, but the people around him. And so thank you for sharing that.
Right.
I'm sending my best to you. I'm sending my best to the family. Darlene, thank you so much for coming on. Chip, thank you so much for coming on, explaining the intricacies of this case, but also getting us a chance to know a little bit more about you and a little bit more about Carson. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.